Salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man walah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, I hope all of you are doing well, keeping yourself safe and also sane at the same time. And I hope that those who might be directly affected by the floods, by the recent floods, that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you and your family patience and also strength in facing this test from Allah Azza wa Jalla. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also reward those of you who might be involved in voluntary activities or efforts, to help those in need. As agreed in the WhatsApp group, we will resume with classes as normal, in which I will deliver live lectures on Tuesday and we will meet virtually, inshallah, on Thursday afternoon. So in the next perhaps 25 minutes or 30 minutes or so, inshallah, I will go through hadith which are acceptable, or hadith maqbul. So we will look at accepted hadith, the criteria, etc. And inshallah, next week we will look at the weak hadith, or hadith mardud, rejected hadith, and also, as I mentioned just now, hadith which are deemed to be weak and the cause of weaknesses, etc. So let me share the slides with you. So as mentioned, we will look at the criteria of accepted hadith and also common verification terms, and the concept of da'if or weak hadith, inshallah, we will go through next week, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. So when it comes to accepted hadith or hadith maqbul, hadith maqbul is basically defined as that which the truthfulness and reliability of its narrators have been confirmed, because this is the basis of accepting hadith, in which the truthfulness, and also the reliability of its transmitters have been confirmed. Okay, these two aspects, the truthfulness and reliability of the transmitters of the hadith, have been confirmed. In terms of number, in terms of the number of narrators who narrate hadith, if a hadith is mutawatir, in which there are many narrators at each level of transmission, that it is impossible for them to come together and perpetrate a lie against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then that hadith, which is deemed to be mutawatir, it is automatically authentic and acceptable. Meaning, one need not verify the hadith and determine its authenticity, because automatically a hadith which is mutawatir, which is shared by an indefinite number of people in such a way that excludes the possibility of their agreement to perpetrate a lie upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that is hadith mutawatir, in which its authenticity is confirmed, and as such it is accepted. Hadith ahad, on the other hand, is the one which requires scrutiny. It requires us to determine its authenticity. So when it comes to hadith ahad, it is a hadith which is reported by one, two, or more, which has not yet fulfilled the requirements and conditions of mutawatir. So basically, any hadith which does not qualify to become mutawatir, it is deemed to be ahad. And when it is deemed to be ahad, then one is required to determine its authenticity. And when it comes to the authenticity of hadith ahad, scholars would normally divide it into two. We have what is known as hadith sahih, and that which is known as hadith hasan. Hadith sahih and hadith hasan. Hadith sahih is that which has a continuous chain, transmitted by the upright who possess retentive memory from another who has the same qualities. And the hadith must also be free from isolation and defects. So first, the chain must be continuous. Secondly, the narrators must be trustworthy or upright. Thirdly, it has to do with the dabt, or the accuracy or retentive memory of the transmitter. Fourthly, the hadith must be free from isolation. and the hadith must also be free from defects. So these are the 5 criteria which must be fulfilled for a hadith to be considered sahih. Yeah. On the other hand, we have hadith Hassan, yeah, which also falls under the category of hadith maqbul or accepted hadith. So what is the difference between hadith sahih and hadith Hassan? Hadith sahih, the first criteria similar to hadith sahih, hadith Hassan similar to hadith sahih, it must have, or if we are referring to a singular, so it must has, uh, doesn't sound right, okay. That which has a continuous chain, yeah. Secondly, it must be transmitted by an upright transmitter, yeah. Thirdly, the transmitter must possess or possesses a lesser degree of retentive memory compared to transmitters of authentic hadith, and the hadith must be free from isolation and also free from defects. So the only difference between hadith Hasan and hadith Sahih is the accuracy or retentive memory of the transmitters. So when it comes to hadith Hasan, the accuracy or retentive memory of the transmitters is lesser, yeah, compared to transmitters of hadith which are deemed to be sahih. Yeah. So here it is about the degree of the accuracy or retentive memory of the transmitters. So that is what differentiates between hadith sahih and also hadith hasan. So again, just to reiterate, these are the 5 conditions for a hadith to be accepted: continuation of the chain of transmission, uprightness and reliability of its transmitter, meaning the transmitter must be someone who has moral integrity, he is trustworthy. Thirdly, the transmitter must have a good accuracy or retentive memory, and the hadith must be free from isolation and free from obvious and hidden defects. So let's look at each of these criteria. So when it comes to the continuation of the chain of transmission, yeah, we must establish that each transmitter received the hadith mubasharatan, yeah, explicitly or directly, or in certain cases implicitly, yeah. So that which indicates direct transmission would be, for example, if a transmitter said that he heard or he witnessed, yeah, directly, or he used certain expressions such as sami'tu, I heard, yeah, or it was related to me, akhbarani or haddathani or ra'aytu, yeah, which basically indicates direct hearing or direct witnessing of something, then this establishes direct transmission. Implicit transmission, on the other hand, is normally the case in which a transmitter transmits from an authority who was a contemporary, and the expression that was normally used would be qala, yeah, said, or would be an, or would be fa'ala, yeah. So these are some indicators which alludes to the fact that the transmission was done implicitly, yeah. um, so how does one identify continuity in the sanad? Firstly, through the knowledge of the date of birth and death of the transmitters, to verify that it was possible for a transmitter to transmit from the other. So first we establish the possibility that it was indeed possible for a transmitter to transmit who he claims he transmitted from. And the easiest way of doing so is determining or basically checking the date of birth and the date of deaths of the transmitters to make sure that there is a certain overlap, yeah, and that it was possible for a transmitter to transmit from the other who he claimed he transmitted from, yeah. Secondly, statement of a transmitter or hadith scholar that a transmitter actually met, heard, or saw the other, yeah. So if a scholar, a hadith scholar, does mention or does state that indeed this transmitter did transmit from this person, then that would also establish the continuity of the chain. As for uprightness and reliability of transmitters, or adala, how do we define this? We define adala, or a person who has adala, or a person who is upright, as one who is consistent in one's religion, exhibit good conduct, free from indulging in sins. Basically, he is not a fasiq, and he is free from indulging in matters which could affect one's dignity. So basically, he must be consistent in his religion, istiqamah, performing all the obligations, avoiding from sins, and he must exhibit good conduct, good akhlaq, and he must not indulge in sins, on a continuous basis, which would then render him to be a fasiq, and he also must avoid from matters which could affect his dignity, his muru'ah. So what's the indication of uprightness and reliability? First, the statement of scholars of the science of al-jarh wa ta'dil. Remember, we did mention about al-jarh wa ta'dil, which is basically the discreditation and accreditation of transmitters. So this science is important in establishing the uprightness of the transmitter. Or if the transmitter is a prominent personality, then he is considered to be upright. For example, if the transmitter is one of the imams of the madhab, for example, then there is no question about his integrity or his uprightness. As for the retentive memory or the accuracy of the transmitters, the dabt, the transmitter must have exceptional memory. Al-dabt fi sudur means that the person must possess good memory since receiving the hadith until transmitting the hadith. So within that period, he receives the hadith, and to the point in which he then transmits the hadith, his memory must be good. Or if he has the ability to narrate hadith from memory anytime required. So if this person is capable of basically just narrating hadith, from his memory, that establishes or that indicates his good memory. Or we have ad-dabt fi sutur. Sorry, that's a mistake in the Arabic spelling. It shouldn't be a sudur, but it should be a sutur. In this sense, it is related to the documentation or the record of the hadith, in which it must be preserved from the time it was written, meaning that no addition or changes were made to the document. So either one could preserve hadith in one's memory, and from the time the person received the hadith until he transmits it, we have to establish that his memory was good, and also his capability perhaps to recall hadith at any time required. So that is how we determine the good memory of the transmitter. Secondly, in terms of documentation, we must establish if the transmitter depends on documentation, then we have to determine that the document has not been altered. From the beginning, it was written down. From the initial time that the hadith was written down, that nothing was added or changed to that document. So how does one indicate, or how can we actually identify this accuracy or good memory? Basically, this is done by comparing transmission with other transmissions, the upright and reliable transmitters, and analyze any discrepancies. So basically comparing narrations. And by comparing, then we can identify whether there are certain differences. And then from there on, we can establish the accuracy or the retentive memory of the transmitter. The hadith must also be free from isolation. Isolation meaning that it does not contradict transmission of other authorities who were more in number, or an authority who has higher reputation. So the hadith must not contradict transmissions of authorities who were higher in number, meaning more authorities, or an authority who has higher reputation. And finally, the hadith must also be free from defects, free from apparent and also hidden defects. And this inshallah will become clearer when we look at hadith da'if, which basically in which basically we will look at the reasons for hadith to be deemed weak and subsequently rejected. Coming back to hadith sahih and hadith hasan, there are also what is known as hadith sahih li ghayrihi. So if a hadith is a sahih, meaning it is authentic by itself, normally one might refer to it as as sahih li dhatihi, meaning that it is sound due to itself. However, sahih li ghayrihi, the hadith is considered to be sound due to or it is considered to be sahih due to external factors. So basically, it is a hadith which is initially hasan, but elevated to the position of sahih due to the presence of chains of transmitters which are similar in strength or stronger. So if there are other sanads which are similar in strength or stronger, then the hadith which is hasan is elevated to the status of sahih li ghayrihi. Similarly, hasan li ghayrihi, it is a hadith which is good, and it is good due to external factors. So initially the hadith is weak, but then the hadith is elevated to the position of hasan due to the presence of sanads which are similar in strength or stronger, or due to the cause of its weakness not being the transmitter being a fasiq. So the cause of weakness is not because the transmitter is deemed to be a fasiq or a liar, but perhaps due to the weak memory of its transmitters, or perhaps discontinuity in its isnad, which can be because there are certain compromises that can be made in this sense, when it comes to discontinuity, and this we will look at further when we look at da'if or weak hadith, or if the narrators are unknown or majhul. This will become clearer inshallah when we look at hadith da'if, because it is basically a hadith which has been deemed to be da'if, deemed to be weak, but then it is elevated to the status of hasan, and it's then as hasan li ghayrihi. So these are some of the common verification terms which we might come across. For example, if it is said that hadha hadith sahih, that this hadith is authentic, it means that it fulfills the 5 criteria or 5 characteristics of hadith sahih, of authentic hadith, which we mentioned just now, which is continuity in the sanad, uprightness of the transmitter, accuracy or retentive memory of the transmitter. It must be free from isolation and free from defects. Hadha hadith sahihul isnad. What does this actually mean? It means that the chain of transmitters of this hadith is authentic, meaning that the sanad is sound, while the matan is not necessarily authentic. So there might be an issue here with the matan, but the sanad, there is no issue with it. Asahul asanid, on the other hand, means that this is the most authentic sanad, meaning that there are various levels of authenticity of the sanad based on different levels of retentive memory of the transmitters. So I think I've mentioned this before. When it comes to hadith, there might be several sanads, and when we compare the strength of each sanad, the one which is strongest would be referred to asahul asanid. Hadha asahhu shay'un fil bab. This is the most authentic on this particular matter. It means that this is the most reliable hadith on a particular matter which does not necessitate its authenticity. Meaning, on a particular issue, perhaps there are a few hadith which addresses the issue, and this particular hadith is considered to be asahhu shay'un fil bab, the most authentic on the matter which does not necessitate its authenticity. Muttafaq alayh, on the other hand, refers to hadith which are agreed upon by both Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim. Ala shart al-shaykhain basically means that the hadith conforms to the conditions set by both al-Bukhari and Muslim, or if the hadith is transmitted through their chains of transmitters. Hadith hasan sahih, on the other hand, which can be found in certain collections such as Jami' at-Tirmidhi. Yeah, what does it actually mean? This hadith is Hassan and Sahih. What does it actually mean? It could mean one of the following, meaning that the hadith has two or more sanads, and that some are Hassan while some others are Sahih, or that some scholars would deem the hadith to be Sahih while others would consider it to be Hassan. Yeah. Or it could also mean that the hadith is Hassan li dhatihi or Sahih li ghayrihi, because Sahih li ghayrihi, the hadith was initially Hassan. Yeah. So it could mean either that as well. So these are basically some common verification terms which you might come across when it comes to determining the authenticity or the veracity of hadith. I guess I will stop here, and inshallah next week then we will look at weak hadith. Yeah, and as I mentioned just now, in the definition of Hasan li ghayrihi, etc., we did mention weak hadith because it is basically a weak hadith which is elevated, yeah, to the status of Hasan. So this will also become clearer, inshallah, when we go through rejected hadith. So I will stop here, inshallah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Please stay safe, take care of yourselves till we meet on Wednesday, inshallah ta'ala.